What is up, guys? Evildoers Farm here today. Today I have for you a video where we're going to be discussing the requirements to be able to run Black Tower or Skybreak Spire or Raven King or all that stuff that you hear in faction chat, people saying, let's run it. What do you actually need to be able to run this? So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss like general stat requirements, then we're going to go ahead and look at more specific gear that will help you to be able to clear it, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about actual specific like team comp mechanics sorts of things that you're going to need to run the dungeon. So let's start off with like stat requirements flat out first. So if you open up your player menu, which is P on the keyboard, it's going to bring up this menu here that you see. This P menu shows you several stats, and the important ones that we're looking for, of course, is your HP, your AP, and your accuracy. These stats are very, very critical. However, attack power is supplemented, sort of, depending on your gear and your actual mechanics and ping and a whole bunch of stuff. So AP is not a be-all, end-all. However, HP, your defensive stats, and your accuracy are super, super critical. So accuracy, first and foremost, you need at least 125% accuracy. 125% accuracy isn't too hard to come by these days, but the reason you need that much accuracy is because the mobs that you need to CC during the boss fights actually have like thresholds, so you have a chance to miss your CC if you do not meet the accuracy requirements. So super, super critical that you have those stats. Now, HP-wise, you're going to want to have at least 100,000 HP. So why 100,000 HP? The different bosses have different mechanics that do damage to you over time. So, for example, the first boss has a damage mechanic that poisons you, kind of like in Kandavihar DKV. That dungeon, or that raid, how you get that damage over time stack that you need to clear with the mites, well, it's a different clearing mechanic, but that same thing applies. It lowers your damage and it does damage over time to you. So you need to be able to survive that while you wait for your team to carry out the mechanic in that phase. And the only way to do that is through higher healths or higher defensive stats, which is coming from your HP stats. So if I were to make a recommendation to you, I would always have at least 20 points into defense when you're running Skybreak Spire, regardless of your AP, regardless of the requirements for your team, whatever. Always make sure to have that 100,000 HP minimum. After that, after accuracy, HP, the next important stat sort of is tied into your attack power, but it's more tied into your attack power, your critical chance, your critical damage, and your shadow or flame or whatever your element's damage is. And that stat is your damage per second. So the very first boss, you need to do at least 17,900 something damage per second across all 12 players of your party to go ahead and actually complete the boss before it's in rage timer. That being said, you're more going to want to be towards the 25,000 range because there are mechanics during the dungeon that halve your DPS. So if your DPS is halved, obviously you're going to be doing less, but there are also mechanics that self-damage the boss during it. So right around that 20,000 to 25,000 range is where you should be shooting for to be able to clear the very first boss. So your DPS is calculated by running a parse, which if you don't know what a parse is, it's fighting against the sacred Lungani, Lunguai, Lungui in the F12 menu, the Hongmoon training room. I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now because I'm not going to spend 15 minutes doing it. But what you do is you fight that boss for the time until the boss dies, or like half of a boss health. And you'll see a DPS meter in the top corner. That's basically a pretty good idea about your DPS that you do on your character. So that is how you figure out your DPS, whether or not you're going to beat that 20,000 or 25,000 range DPS that you need to clear the first boss. Second boss is a similar story, however it's far more mechanically intensive and requires the accuracy bonuses because of the CCs that you have to apply during it. And then to complete bosses 3 and 4, you really need to be in that 35,000, 30,000 DPS range to clear those bosses because of their high health and their enraged timers, in addition to the mechanics that they have as well. So you should be shooting, if you want to clear entirety through of Black Tower or Skybreak Spire, you're going to be wanting to hit about 35,000, 40,000 DPS to be able to clear it. And then as for the lower bosses, 25,000 DPS is a pretty good range to be able to clear those as well, in addition to maintaining your 100,000 health, of course. So also note that you're probably going to get less DPS than you do on your parse, so you're always going to want to be a little bit above that. That's because you got the lag, the number of people in the room, a whole bunch of different factors lower your DPS during those dungeons. So you're definitely going to want to make sure you meet the higher end of the DPS requirements that I outlined. So those are just straight gear checks. That doesn't even get into any of the facts of like knowledge bases or information that you need to have before running the dungeon. So the first thing I can recommend before you ever go into it is to read the BNS Academy page on Skybreak Spire to get an idea of the different things you'll be fighting. I'm going to be putting out an actual BT guide that's going to go pretty well in depth into each of the bosses that you're going to face inside of the dungeon. That'll be in the near future. However, don't just go in saying, "Oh, I don't know what's going on." Read through the BNS Academy page. Put a link to it in the description below to make sure you have a good idea of what's going to happen. So as far as like compositions for your team, though, since that's the next thing we're going to talk about, is that you're going to want to make sure that you have at least 3 characters that can tank. Doesn't have to be a straight tank like a Blade Master or a Kung Fu Master, but they need to be able to hold aggro against bosses for bosses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Boss 4 only needs 1 tank. Boss 3 needs 2 tanks. Boss 2 needs 3 tanks. And boss 1 needs 1 tank. So you need to have 3 tanks or 3 people capable of tanking in your raid. It's a good idea if those are Blade Masters or Kung Fu Masters because of the increased threat. It'll help them. But if you just have a super high DPS person in your party, they could also function as the tank. In addition to that, you're going to want to have at least 1 healer for both parties. Like I said, with the damage over time effects that you get during the dungeons, you definitely want to have healers to help keep your party alive. If you could have more than 1 healer, it would be great. As far as party buffs go, you want to get your Kung Fu Master party buff, your Assassin party buff, or you want to get the Warlock Soul Burn. And then if you could throw in a couple gunners to be able to reset that as well, you'll be in a good position to be able to clear these bosses with the increased DPS. So generally, you just want a balanced party. It is going to be difficult to run it in full parties of 1 class or 2 classes, but it has been done before, and I don't want to preclude that, saying that you can't do it. But it is a lot easier for your first couple times if you're trying to get into one to make sure you fulfill a role within your party. Other information that you should know before getting into it is there's this thing called the Dawn of Kandahar antidote, or Kandahar antidote or something, and it's sold by this lady right here on the map. So if you see on the map over here, I'll circle it. She is the left merchant right here. So you're going to want, that's a lie, she's the right merchant. You want to talk to the right merchant over here. She has these things called Kandahar antidotes. So the Kandahar antidote, how it works, is during the first boss, when you're fighting the Venom Skydrake, the first boss, it's going to give you the poison stacks that I've been saying. That is cleared by a mechanic that is carried out by 1 player of your team. If the player of your team doesn't do it in time, or if you're starting to get low on health, the only way to get rid of the poison effect is through this Kandahar antidote. So it gets rid of the poison effect on that boss. Now it is relatively expensive. They cost a gold apiece, plus the actual items that you have to exchange for as well. It's 5 regular dungeon antidotes exchanged for 5 Kandahar antidotes plus 5 gold. But it's something you definitely need to run this dungeon, especially if it's one of your first times and you're not entirely sure on where you're supposed to be going or whatnot. You're going to want to make sure that you pick these up because it will heal you and fix your problems in that first boss so you don't die. Because the worst thing you can do in this dungeon, in this raid, is die. If you're not doing DPS, your party is going to suffer. So that is another thing you want to make sure you pick up. Other things, you're going to want to have some sort of voice chat program, so like Discord is a great one to use. Doesn't use very much computer processing power. Another one is the Twitch chat, formerly known as Curse, also doesn't use very much power. And then, of course, you've got your crazy programs like you could use a Ventrilo or I believe TeamSpeak's another one that people like to use. So you get a whole bunch of different chat programs that are very low computer-intensive programs. So go ahead and pick one of those up to make sure you can communicate with your team. Even if you can't communicate or you don't want to talk back with them, having them there to tell you, okay, we need to stun now, is super, super critical for completing the dungeon. And that is generally all you need to be able to run the dungeon. Another quick note on gear is that you're going to want to have your 8-piece MSP, or if you're like a Blade Master, I think it's 5-piece MSP and then 3-piece of like Xanos, something like that. So 8-piece MSP, 3-piece Xanos, or 5-piece MSP, 3-piece Xanos, or 8-piece MSP for your soul shields when you go in. Also picking up your legendary accessories, so your legendary neck, your legendary belt. Those are 2 good things to go ahead and pick up before running this, but they're not necessary at all. As you can see, I ran it with full Pinnacle and picked up my 2 BT accessories from running the raid. It's more about knowing what you're doing and ensuring that you don't die and doing enough DPS to make sure your party can clear the dungeon. So anyway, guys, I hope this gives you an idea of what you need to prepare for this dungeon, what stats, what sorts of gear requirements and all that. If you did enjoy the video, if it helped you, make sure you leave a like. If you've got any further questions, leave the comments section below. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.